I'm currently in Lichfield, Erasmus Darwin's herb garden. Well, a mock-up of his herb garden, but we'll come to that in a minute. So, let's get into it. When you walk through this garden, it's easy to think you're just looking at something that's been put together to give a general feel of the past. A kind of visual nod to history rather than anything grounded in it. But the reality is, what you're looking at here is much closer to the real thing than most people realise. Because although this is a recreation, a mock example of Erasmus Darwin's original herb garden down the Abnalls, every plant you see has been carefully chosen to reflect what would have actually been growing during this time. Nothing here is modern, nothing has been added just to make it look nice, and everything you're seeing would have been familiar to Darwin himself, whether that was for medicine, for cooking, or for everyday use within the home. And that's important because Darwin wasn't just a gardener. And this wasn't just a decorative space tucked away behind a house. This was a working garden in every sense of the word, tied directly into daily life at a time when people relied far more heavily on what they could grow for themselves. As a doctor, Darwin would have understood the properties of many of these plants, and how they could be used to treat illness or manage symptoms. While inside the house, Mrs. Darwin would have been using many of the same herbs in cooking, as well as for cleaning, scenting rooms, and even basic forms of disinfecting. So when you look around, you're not just looking at plants, you're looking at a system. Something practical and something functional. Something that supported both health and home life in a way that feels completely different to how we live today. And as you move further into the garden, it becomes clear that this isn't just one single space, but something far more structured and intentional. Because what you're actually looking at is a series of carefully divided sections, each one reflecting a different part of Georgian life and the way plants were used on a daily basis. At the heart of it sits what's known as Mrs. Darwin's culinary garden, and this really shows just how important herbs and spices were at the time, not just for flavour but for a whole range of domestic uses. Because these plants weren't simply grown for cooking, they were used for cleaning, for scenting and even disinfecting in an age before Dettol even existed. From there, the garden is divided into 4 distinct beds, each one representing a different role that the plants would have played. One of the most significant is Dr. Darwin's medicine chest garden, which includes plants that are directly referenced in his own writings and gives a clear picture of the kinds of remedies that would have been used by a professional physician in the 18th century. Not as guesswork, but as part of an understood and practiced approach to treatment. And this section isn't just a recreation either, because it's recently been awarded plant collection status in the historic category by Plant Heritage, which means it's been formally recognised for both its accuracy and its importance. Alongside that sits the Apothecary's garden, which reflects the kind of herbs that would have been supplied by the 18th century high streets, the places people would have gone for treatments, advice and prepared remedies, long before anything like boots ever existed. Then we have the Dyers Garden, which shows a completely different side to plant use, focusing on species that would have been used to produce natural dyes for fabrics, something that was essential at the time and supported local trades within the city. And finally, we've got the scented garden, which brings fragrance and colour into this space, not just to complement the house, but to reflect the fact that even in a working garden there was always an appreciation for how the place looked and felt. But the story here isn't about just what's growing in the garden, because the house behind it has its own quiet detail that most people walk straight past without ever noticing. What you see today as the front of the house wasn't always the front at all. Originally, what we now think of as the back of the building was actually the main entrance, the proper face of the house. But as Lichfield began to expand and people started using Beacon Street to enter the town, the area around Darwin's home started to change. That original layout no longer reflected the kind of image he wanted to present, especially as a doctor, because appearance mattered, and the way a house looked could say a lot about the person living inside of it. So Darwin made a decision to effectively turn the house around. He added a new front facade onto what had originally been the back of the building, creating something cleaner, more refined and more in line with the growing town, while also allowing him to present a sense of professionalism, cleanliness and order. And if you look closely today, you can still see traces of what came before, because built into that later facade is the line of an older wall, the remains of the boundary that once surrounded the close, quietly preserved within the structure itself. It's one of those details that's easy to miss, but once you know it's there, it completely changes how you see the building. Because what looks like a single front suddenly becomes something layered, and something adapted over time. And when you tie that back to the garden, it all starts to make sense. Because both the house and the space behind it tells the same kind of story. one of practicality, adaptation and quiet intention. This wasn't just a place to live, and it wasn't just a place to grow plants. It was a working environment, shaped by a man who balanced medicine, science and home life all within the same space. So although this garden is a recreation, and the original sits further down the road in the Abnalls, what you're seeing here still gives you something genuine. Not just how it might have looked, but how it might have worked, how it would have been used and how it fits into the wider story of Erasmus Darwin's life. You can take a look around the herb garden yourself for free, or you can enter into the museum, which was Erasmus Darwin's house, for just £5. Open every day except Wednesdays.